Welcome to Duncan Thorin Shield's YouTube channel. I managed to con Duncan into convincing his friend to pay me thousands of dollars as a professional Counter-Strike player, so maybe he can convince you that some of his analysis is correct.
This video, like many on my channel, is of course brought to you both via my knowledge, creativity, ambition to be a prolific content creator, and also I do use caffeine. It's my favourite stimulant, and this is a really lovely flavour. Dragon fruit punch, classic old school one you might have heard. It's one of the earliest ones I actually got from GamerSupps. The reason it endures though, it is just a classic flavour. If you know the flavour dragon fruit, it's a little bit stronger than you might expect in that sense. It's obviously a very watery flavour. It's kind of like almost a berry type flavour. I think it's quite nice, actually quite pleasant. And I just find it's one of the best baseline ones. There's never ever one I don't like. Also, a little pro tip, it blends really well with the other ones. Like blend that with something like Blue Raz or Lemonade or something. It'll go really, really well. That's actually a combo angle people don't think of. Put half a portion of both, make little GamerSupps cocktails, in this case non-alcoholic obviously. Now you can get anything on GamerSupps store 10% off using my code Thorin, Thorin. Obviously we are at the semi-finals of the second CS2 Major, Perfect World Shanghai, aren't we? And what do you know, it's actually been pretty crazy, right? Because day one began with what I think were the favourites, Mouz and Spirit, both winning. Yeah, they had a few slip-ups, didn't look clean always, but they did win. And then you swap over, and today, actually, in theory, G2 and Vitality are supposed to be the bigger favourites. G2 almost got clapped. Like, that could have actually been 2-0 heroic if Nico didn't go God mode and Nobs just get all those kills on the third map. And then actually, the Vitality FaZe series is bonkers. Like, who could possibly predict that? Like, everyone knows I love to bet on FaZe anytime the odds are there. But like I told you, there just was no logical reason to. I don't think anyone really thought there was a way for FaZe to win that series. I will say they did do some shenanigans in the draft, which I'll obviously talk about. But it was actually different shenanigans than I expected. But that will actually potentially lead into what might happen in the semi-finals. And obviously now, in theory, any of these four teams that have made it actually could win the major. Even FaZe Clan, even Spirit, whoever you think can't win, they can at this point in time. They're just, to get to this point, the pressure goes crazy. Like you saw at the final of the last major, you never know when someone's going to play like above the rim, way better than they should, and then someone else is going to play way below their level, and it's going to get to them, etc. Shout out to Zimu. That's a joke, actually. He was pretty good on map one, at least. So let's get into it. Mouz against Spirit, the first one. Now, the first thing to remember about this series, which everyone seems to forget, because unfortunately the first season, is actually why I like that season terminology, does feel like a lifetime goal. The first season almost feels like last year, doesn't it? Whereas it was already earlier this year. It was the first part of the year. So basically, if you remember, when Spirit initially came along and looked unbeatable at Katowice, and they were even rolling through that RMR, the first team to actually properly give Spirit a beating was Mouz. If you remember, they were the ones in the RMR that beat them. And then when we went to the major, obviously then it was FaZe and going like that. So actually Mouz early on was a team that could counter the Spirit squad. I think it makes a lot of sense. They had a great map pool. They were actually one of the only teams that have like a really strong distribution of firepower that could turn up. Also bizarrely, there just seemed to be certain mismatches actually, and certain people just kind of got fragged out. I also think people like Zontic struggled actually when there's clutch players on the other side of the team sometimes. So the interesting thing is, that hasn't necessarily continued on beyond that. Like if you go and look, they played after that, and look, let's see, there's the RMR one. Then you went to, that's like an online game or something, I think. That's the RMR, 2-0. Then they had the first bet boom, not to be confused with the second Belgrade one, which was won by Spirit. This is the one where Mouz actually clapped Spirit. They 3-0'd them in the final. Then they bet the second Belgrade one, which was obviously in August here. And that was when Spirit won a really close 2-1. Like this ancient game here, I can tell you, Yimfat was winning tons of clutches. It was really close. Donk had to go crazy to get them the win. And that was really close. And it actually made you think, oh my goodness, what happens if they meet in the finals? It's going to be fire, isn't it? But the problem is Mouz never made it. Actually, after this match is when Mouz went on that insane losing streak where they were just bombing everything. They were losing to Hellfire low bracket. They were losing for like the next 3 weeks or something in all the tournaments. So I'm actually very interested because I feel like your Spirit, you won the last time you met. You actually feel like, hey, you know what? Mouz isn't even necessarily the team we expected to see in the semis of a major. We'd think that would be a Na'Vi, a G2, a Vitality. So I think actually both teams should be very confident. Should think they make the final. And if these two teams watch the two matches today, obviously FaZe isn't even considered a top team right now, and you need overperformance right now. And actually, if I watched Heroic versus G2, every team left in the tournament should think they can now win the major against G2. So the most interesting part of this is we have had this matchup a bunch of times before. So if we go to the veto, right, obviously, Spirit always removes Inferno. That is a good removal against Mouz. Mouz removes Anubis. Now, I don't think Anubis is that sick a map. But listen, Liquid is supposedly really good on Anubis, aren't they? And what do you know? They came in and they did that pick of Anubis and they lost it to Spirit. Now, true, that is Team Liquid and their firepower is fucking terrible right now. But I think you have to bear that in mind. I don't think that's necessarily the strength people thought it was. So actually, I think totally fine that Mouz removes that at that point in time. Obviously, the key thing here is where we're going to pick in the semi-final of a major. I want to stress that part. It's not just about what would you pick normally, what you pick in the past. As Kerrigan showed you, people will get funky in the major playoffs because some people want to be more ballsy and go for it. I actually think that's what Halley fucked up at the last major. Some people want to play more conservative and play to their strengths, and they'll even pick into a strength of the opponent if it's their comfort map, or they know they're going to get two maps, their opponent's map and theirs, that they both like to play. They'll just sort of shake hands and say, okay, let's just see who the better team is. Personally, I prefer the former, but I understand you have to have battle-tested players like FaZe does to potentially take all of your prep and throw it out the window if the veto goes a wacky way and you want to keep it going a wacky way and double down, as it were. So crucially, the biggest thing for me here is, in terms of overall firepower, it's actually a very interesting matchup because you've got the two big players, Donk's Mega and Shiro's been pretty good the last few months for Spirit. On Mouz's side, Exertion's up there, but he's not at a Donk level. And then the others are sort of in the middle, but they're still good players. Again, they've sort of got their roles back. They just aren't the big fraggers that they used to be in the first season of this year. So crucially, Mouz never, ever goes away from the Anubis veto. So that's almost certainly going to come in, especially because Spirit just won the other day in that game against Team Liquid. But you know what? Team Spirit never goes away from Inferno. They always ban the Inferno. So you're almost certainly going to get the obvious perms at this point. I don't think either of these coaches are going to gamble. Then after that, you have to look at the picks. Now, interestingly, Spirit's main pick is Dust 2, but their second pick is actually now Anubis. So the interesting thing is they won't be getting Anubis. So almost certainly they should pick the Dust 2. It's a really good map for them. They've got a nice sample size on it. Now look, I don't think Mouz is ever going to be bad on that map. That's a map I've always thought was solid for them. Will always be a legit one. But to be fair, they don't have a pick it. So understandably, if you don't know, their main picks are Mirage and Nuke. It was Nuke 2 days ago. They obviously like to pick the Mirage when they can. I think if you go and look here, it's just obvious to me that you picked actually, I've just realised it isn't. That's the interesting part. Because if you think traditionally, Spirit has started to move back towards the Mirage, which I've always thought at the core essence, Mouz's players are really good at. They clearly are comfortable on that map. But even though their win rate is bonkers on Nuke, if you go back even a few months, actually Spirit had the stats and the record to suggest they were the best team in the world. I actually think the first season they were the best team in the world on Nuke. So there could actually be a world here which is spicy enough where you really do just get Just 2 is the pick for Spirit. But then if you're Mouz, you've got that choice I was referring to earlier. Do you pick into comfort? Now, if you think you're just better and you're going to have more points, you can do it. You can pick into comfort. By the way, maybe you'd win the Nuke. Who knows? The problem is their two main picks. So out of the last 12 vetoes, Mouz has picked Mirage 7 times and Nuke 5 times and then Inferno once out of 13 times. So essentially, they're sort of picking into one of the stronger maps of Spirit, as a map that Spirit themselves like. So that's the question, is where would they go if not those two places? Like, would they really do the Inferno pick? If you go and look, it can't be done. Spirit is the veto of Inferno. So I actually think the interesting part for me is the Mouz angle, because obviously if you don't know on the coin challenge, I have picked Mouz to win. I do think fundamentally they're a better team, even if Donk is better than everyone and clears everyone in the server. Then the interesting thing is, if you're Spirit, you also don't have to go to Dust 2. Like, you obviously can't do Anubis, but you know what? You've actually done the odd, cheeky, ancient pick. Now, I wouldn't be that scared of what happened. Actually, Mongols did put in a good performance where they could have beaten Mouz on that map. That's a map that they've only won one time out of the 3 times they played it in the last 3 months. It's not a bad one to pivot to. It's just that typically you don't think of Spirit as a team that messes around in the Vico. They've also got their own one where they've picked a Mirage once and a Nuke once in the last, 13, 14 times. So I actually think logically they just take the Dust 2. That's fine. The question then is for Mouz, if you just go into theirs, what are you going to get as the decider? Because interestingly, believe it or not, the first most banned map is Dust 2. So logically, in my opinion, if you're Spirit, if you want Dust 2 in the series, you're going to have to pick it. So you actually almost certainly should pick it first anyway. But after that, they do vary it up. They'll go Inferno when it's the right point. This is one thing that shows Mouz has a strong map pool, and they have actually a very good coach, is that they purposely tailor the second ban to the opponent to get the right decider. They don't just always go for the same veto and the same perma, which some teams do, even some top teams. So they'll mix it up. They do the Dust 2, then they do Inferno, they do Ancient. They've even done some Vertigo in there, which obviously typically they're willing to leave up. Obviously, don't want to play against certain teams, maybe the Calls of the world. And so if you go look at the deciders, it's they get an Inferno, they get Just 2, they get a Nuke, they get an Ancient. It basically depends on what the opponent does. So I'm going to try and guess, based on what Spirit does, what I think the last ban from Mouz will be. And the thing is, Spirit themselves mainly second ban Nuke, believe it or not. So I think in a world where they actually have a Mouz Mirage pick, which isn't impossible. If you do a Mouz Mirage pick, I actually think this is where Spirit shouldn't do the second veto Nuke, unless you want to go really crazy. Because as I said, I don't believe Spirit wants to go into crazy veto chaos and things they haven't prepped. I think they want to go towards comfort. So if I'm Spirit, this is what I'm telling my players if I'm Halley. Mate, I think I can get you a series that is just 2. They're going to pick Nuke or Mirage. Let's say they pick Mirage. Then we're just going to let Nuke be the decider. Now, by the way, I think that's perfect if you're them. If you're Mouz, by the way, what don't you like about that? Wouldn't you like to play Mirage, Nuke, and Dust 2? Those are pretty good picks as well. Look at your veto. You don't really want to play Vertigo, by the way. They've done that as a punish before, like into a Vitality when it looked like Vitality didn't play it. I don't think you want to go there. They've had their troubles with some of the teams that are specialists. In the major semi with comfort, why not just play for comfort? Why not just say the better team wins, right? So for me, I actually think the interesting thing is both teams come into this series thinking we're going to like all 3 maps. So it just then becomes which team is better. That's perfect. If you want a great matchup, the fact that both have beaten each other, Mouz did most of the winning, but then Spirit won the last occasion and won that event. I think that's perfect to set up the occasion. Both teams aren't teams that are supposed to be in the final or are used to being in the final of a major. So I think actually there'll be a bit of nerves on each side. I think this could be a full 3-set banger. I think that's the key thing for me. It could be all 3 maps. Then we have another matchup we've seen many, many times. But this one, it feels like you see it every event, doesn't it? Like, you go back to here, look how many times they played this year. They played at Katowice, obviously when Huxley was there. That was a win by FaZe. They played at the, what was that, the Major? Or the RMR one, the RMR, because it's February. So that was obviously when Huxley was there still. Dallas was when Stewie2K was there. Then he came to Blast 4 when you had Snacks. G2 won again. By the way, G2 wins all the time in this one. In the same way as Na'Vi used to beat G2 every time, G2 always beats FaZe. And crucially, they tend to do the same veto. So the most interesting part to me is this whole matchup for me is just about how does Karrigan fuck with the veto? Keyword how, not if. And after how, can individual players make up for the lack of form in the last few months compared to some of the players, obviously the big 2 and the X factor of Malbs on the side of G2? Now, I certainly think there is a world where G2 players can turn up and shut. By the way, I think they almost got dusted off 2-0. I really think Nico just saved them on that Nuke game, and then Malb saved them with the individual players on the 3rd map. By the way, he was average as fuck for the first 2. It's bizarre, because then Nico was kind of crap on the 3rd map. So you see how up and down these guys are, hence why they can lose the BO1s. But at the same time, it's going to have to be FaZe Magic again, or it's not happening, is it? So crucially to me, I actually pointed this out. If you go back and look at the last 3 months fragging, it's way closer than you think. It's just that Monasty's way ahead of everyone. Actually, Rops and Frozen have the same sort of rating as Nico for the last 3 months, if you don't know. And it's more just people like, and actually the low end of FaZe is actually higher than you'd expect. It's actually people like Snacks and Hunter who are letting the team down in that sense. So it won't actually be the same crazy CSTM I hoped it would be for G2 against Vitality. But if we go and look at this one, right, crucially, first things first, this is why you have to be a little bit worried if you're FaZe. Because believe it or not, FaZe gets an edge in every one of the vetoes against G2, which is G2 doesn't float when they play against FaZe. They're scared. They don't want to play Vertigo. So as a result, in their last 12 times out, they banned Vertigo 10 times, and including the last 5 series in a row. It was just against Team Liquid that they didn't, and they went for the Anubis ban because that's Team Liquid's best map far and away. And then back against Na'Vi, who also bans Vertigo, they did a Mirage. So essentially, if you are a real Vertigo team who bans it, but you can play it or have shown you ever will or will float it, G2 will ban it just so they can, because by the way, the rest of their map pool's good. So it will 100% be a Vertigo ban from G2, in my opinion. Or, if they really want to get cheeky, if they're scared with how the heroic game went, they could always, to be fair, themselves float it, like we'd had against FaZe and Spirit at the last major, and they could let it go to the decider and see in the game of chicken who will second ban it there. But I actually think G2 will just say, fuck it, just ban it. They think they're better than FaZe anyway. They've won many of the other series where FaZe didn't have to, because spoiler, if you go back, FaZe themselves have banned Vertigo 8 times out of the last 11 series. 3 times they banned Anubis themselves. One of those was against G2. One of them was against Na'Vi. One of them was Team Liquid. It's the same scenario. These are all teams that perma-ban Vertigo, if you don't know. It's just about who can force the other one to be the one that bans it so they can get a free ban. So crucially, Karrigan actually, for real, can have a free ban here. He can have a free one. Like, this is actually one of the rare times he can get an edge. But the problem is he's also got the edge many other times they played. So that's not going to help you necessarily. Then when we go down and we look at the map win rates, so we assume G2 bans Vertigo. Actually, at this point, what would FaZe ban? Right, they banned Inferno last time they played against G2. They could obviously still ban the Anubis themselves. That's still not a great win rate for them. They do Vertigo and Anubis. So, okay, Anubis would be the obvious one to ban, just because it is even a weak map. Now, when it comes to picks, that's where it gets very interesting. FaZe picked the Inferno, G2 did the Mirage. By the way, that could happen in theory any way round. Like, if you don't know, the top 2 picks for G2, Mirage and Inferno, the top 2 picks for FaZe, Inferno Mirage. But the difference is, you actually, in theory, also vary to the other maps as well. The difference is, FaZe will go to an Ancient as a fringe map. G2 will go to the Anubis. That's why I actually think it's fine to just ban the Anubis if you're FaZe clan again. But the question is, I don't think G2 is going to go to like a crazy punish pick. I think Mirage or Inferno, they are the favourite team. They should win on that one. But I do think if you go and you look, that instead on the side of FaZe clan, this is where I get interested. This is where I have some questions. Because I told you earlier on, they pick the Inferno or they could pick the Mirage. The problem here is this. It doesn't make sense because I think if you see the CT side of G2, it's very hard to beat them on Nuke. But if you want to get silly, you would just say, well, the win rates is what's going to throw them off here. Fuck it, we pick Dust 2 or we pick Nuke. I know that looks crazy, but the point is, you are behind the 8 ball if you are Carrigan and FaZe. You have to do something crazy because your team, if you play comfort, probably isn't going to win. You want the game to be uncomfortable, so then your players do the big game, big balls players and do crazy shit while people are feeling nervous. But also, crucially, a point I always make is this. It's not that Carrigan's doing godlike vetoes into maps only he plays. He's willing to sacrifice all of his prep and his calls to ruin your practice. So when you spend all night thinking we're going to do a Mirage or an Inferno, we'll pick the other one. And you watch all those, say, Inferno demos from FaZe, and then he doesn't pick that, and maybe even second vetoes or something like that. Well, or you've second veto at that point. Who knows? Like, that's the problem. He wants to throw yours out the window. Now, the downside of that, are you ready? This is where Snacks is a positive. Because I don't think they've got a very good T-side, very good quality. It doesn't fucking matter. Put a map G2 on any of these maps. It's not going to matter, is it? Now, the real question is this. Since G2's Ancient is down there, and look, I don't really believe they're that a 38% win rate team, but they just are from the last few months. FaZe has one time in the last, 13 series, picked an Ancient. They actually have done it before. It was against Fnatic, admittedly, at the RMR. But if you wanted to get really naughty, you could do it. I don't know that you're actually good on it, by the way. I haven't felt like Carrigan's really had a feel on that map, at least in this season. But if you want to get really naughty, I don't think they'll prep for that. But again, I don't think they need to. I think Malbs go shoot people in the head with an AK is a real thing. Monacy and Nico just do whatever they want anyway. And as far as I can tell, Nico probably does make half the calls. So if you're FaZe, you do that just to make them feel a bit weird or uncomfortable. They didn't prep for it or waste their time. But you're going to have to actually just shoot them in the server on this one. Meanwhile, if you're G2, when you get to your second ban, you yourself mainly ban Anubis, then Nuke, believe it or not, then Inferno. But against FaZe, you will ban the Nuke. Despite the fact you're 100% win rate in the last 3 months, you will ban it yourself. Now, you could infer from that, by the way, if you're FaZe, maybe you do gamble, like I just said. Maybe you just pick the Nuke and say, fuck it, bombs away. You didn't prep for that, did you? That's plausible too. If you don't do the Nuke ban, being as Anubis I think will be banned already, I actually think that's where maybe you do the Inferno ban if you G2. Then you just force it to a nice map for the Decider, right? Because for a Decider, if they actually do a crazy pick from FaZe, let's just have a Mirage Decider. By the way, I think most teams would agree with that. FaZe does also like Nuke as a Decider, by the way, so that makes me think they might have that. But they might also be willing to let a Just 2 come through as the Decider. So I actually think if you're G2, unless they do something really naughty, like a bonkers Ancient pick, you almost certainly getting 3 maps you like. Hence why, by the way, I do favour G2 to win this series. So yeah, I have Mouz going through and playing G2 in the final. They say no man is an island. We all need people who've got our back. And supporting me and the content on my channel are the following people: Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, The Concept, Animosity, Banediesel, Ben Glass, Jasun, Jensen Goh, Tosh, Torin, and you know it. Always a special thanks goes up to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Do you want to ask a question for my video AMA? Do you want to take part in one of those lengthy discussions where I talk about whatever topics are on your mind? Do you want teasers, find out who the upcoming guests are, or maybe even to suggest a guest or a topic for my content? If any of those perks or others catch your fancy, well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today, where? In the Patreon link in the description box below.